We are honored to have with us our keynote speaker now. He is going to bring to us the next segment of the program entitled, Where Do We Go From Here? Bringing Together a Divided Community. I'd like to introduce to you Bakari Sellers, who made history in 2006 when at 22 years old, he defeated 26-year incumbent state representative to become the youngest member of the South Carolina State Legislature and the youngest African-American elected official in the nation. In 2014, he was the Democratic nominee for lieutenant governor in the state of South Carolina. Earning his undergraduate degree from Morehouse College, where he served as student body president, and his law degree from the University of South Carolina, Sellers has followed in the footsteps of his father, civil rights leader Cleveland Sellers, in his tireless commitment to service. He champions progressive policies to address issues ranging from education and poverty to preventing domestic violence and childhood obesity. His impressive list of accomplishments include having served on President Barack Obama's South Carolina Steering Committee during the 2008 election. Sellers is widely considered to be a rising star in the Democratic Party and a leading voice for his generation. That, coupled with his uncommon ability to reach across the aisle and to get things done, has led to numerous accolades, including being named to Time Magazine's 40 Under 40 in 2010, as well as in 2014. In 2015, he was on the Route 100 list of the nation's most influential African Americans, and he's provided commentary and analysis on CNN and MSNBC, including multiple appearances on Hardball with Chris Matthews and Morning Joe. He served as a featured speaker at events for the National Education Association, College Democrats of America National Convention, the 2008 Democratic National Convention. Sellers practices law with the Strom Law Firm, LLC, in Columbia, South Carolina, and we all know him as a political commentator at CNN. He is married to Dr. Ellen Rucker Sellers. Let's give a big round of applause for Bakari Sellers.
Thank you so much. Good morning. Good morning. It is a privilege and a pleasure and every other adjective you can possibly think of to describe how I feel about being in this room today. My mom and dad always taught me that the two most important words in the English language were the words thank you. And they're not nearly said enough, so before I begin, I have to say some thank yous. I think we owe Chris another round of applause for coming out and showing the courage to speak up and speak out. When I had an opportunity to look at this panel that was moderated by Mr. Spears, who I love watching on SportsCenter when they bring him in because he looks so comfortable, like he's Skyping from his bedroom. I had this image of in my head of when we saw Muhammad Ali and Jim Brown and Bill Russell sitting at a table together with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and we had all of those legends of the sports world who were talking about activism and being activists. I've always watched Takeo Spikes. He's the reason I don't play football because I felt as if I could never be hit by him. Carrie Potts, I don't know if she's still in the room, but it was my first time hearing of her story, and with all due respect to the guys, she was by far the strongest person on this stage. Of course, we all love Dominique, and having the opportunity to be in his presence is awesome. Thabo, as a lawyer, I've watched your case from afar, and I can honestly say the strength and courage you showed, not just in the legal profession, but me being a young man of color is something that I always look up to, and so thank you for that. And to Chris Jackson, Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf, who is the reason that I'm able to stand before you today, and many young people feel as if they can change the world. I always tell people it takes people to sit down so we can stand up. And contrary to whatever Trask Shaq may talk, Chris Jackson is probably the greatest basketball player in the history of Louisiana State University. With that being said, I have an awesome task today. the question that was posed for this discussion, and I know that I'm the only thing that's in between you guys and lunch, and so I'm going to treat you all today a lot like Elizabeth Taylor treated all 7 of her husbands, and that means I'm not going to keep you long. But the task that I was challenged with today is one in which we ask the question, where do we go from here? And so I'm going to apologize beforehand for bombarding you with questions that are rooted in such simplicity, but I think that they're necessary to answer as we take this journey of inclusiveness, as we take this journey to excellence, as we take this journey of, quote unquote, bringing our country together. Because before I can answer the question, where do we go from here, I have to ask an even more simple question, an even more important question. That is, how far have we come? And so when I think about this question of how far have we come, I have to use some historical context. And mind you, I'm only 32 years old, and so this is not a historical context in which I lived, but this is one in which I read. For me, I like to think back to 1946. There was a young man named George Elmore. George Elmore, he was so fair-skinned that he could pass for being white. And so George got this awesome idea. He was one of the rare breeds of being a black entrepreneur in the early 40s. He had 2 liquor stores. He owned a 5 and dime store. He had a taxi cab company, and he was a photographer. But because George could pass, George decided that he was going to register to vote. And so George went down and he signed his paperwork up and he registered to vote. And during the first Democratic primary in the South, after he registered to vote, George showed up at the polling places. And they looked at George and they said, wait a minute, George, you're a Negro. Although you can pass, we do know that you are a Negro. You can't vote, get out of here. And George being a strong black man, George being an entrepreneur, George having that spirit of America, George said, well, I'm going down and I'm going to get my attorney and I'm going to file a lawsuit. That lawsuit was known as Elmore versus Rice. And after he filed the lawsuit, what people don't realize is that the supplies to his stores and the distribution to his stores began to dry up. The Klan and other terrorist groups began to bomb his stores and burn up his taxi cabs. Black people were afraid to do business with his photography company anymore, so George ended up losing everything he had. And because of the terrorism that he was facing, his wife fell victim as well. Ended up becoming institutionalized from seeing everything going on around her. But George became successful. And in Elmore versus Rice, it shattered the norms. And George pulled his best Tybo impersonation and won his lawsuit. And George Elmore is the reason now that African Americans can vote in primaries throughout the South. I think about 1947, and it's a story that I kind of feel bad about sharing because I feel as if more people should know. There was a young woman, her name was Sarah Mae Fleming. She was 22 years old. And Sarah was a domestic worker. She worked in hotels. And one day after work, she and a friend decided that they were going to get on a bus. And this is back when the buses were owned by the utility companies in the South. And so this bus was owned by South Carolina Electric and Gas. And so when she got on the bus, she sat down on the front of the bus. And the bus driver said, of course, no, you can't sit here in the front. But that wasn't Sarah's sin. Sarah's sin was that she was told to get off the bus, and instead of walking out of the back door where the Negroes came in and the colored folks, she walked out the front door. And as she was going out the front door, the bus driver punched her in the stomach and rolled her down the steps. Sarah Mae Fleming called the NAACP and had some good attorneys to join her, and she filed a lawsuit. It was called Fleming's versus South Carolina Electric and Gas. And before there was a lady named Rosa Parks, there was a lady named Sarah Mae Fleming who sat down first. So then I think about 1949. 1949 in Clarendon County, South Carolina, not too far away from here. Parents of African-American children simply wanted their kids to have the same opportunity as white kids, and they wanted their kids to be able to ride school buses. And so these parents filed a lawsuit known as Briggs v. Elliott. Briggs v. Elliott was the foundation. It was literally the first case filed in the compilation and collection of cases that we now call Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. This little case in this little town, this little small county in South Carolina, in Clarendon County, was actually where they introduced the Kenneth Clark doll experiment. And I think about in 1954, I think about how Chief Justice Warren got this very rare unanimous opinion in which he held that segregation caused a sense of inferiority by placing children in environments not conducive to learning. Think about that for a second. He said segregation causes a sense of inferiority by placing children in environments not conducive to learning. Now, don't think that's brilliance or anything. Chris will tell you, any other lawyers will tell you that's just $100,000 worth of law school debt. That is what that will get you. But I asked myself this very simple question since George Elmore in 1946, since Sarah Mae Fleming in 1947, since Briggs v. Elliott in 1949. Ask yourself this very simple question: how far have we come? How far have we come? And I don't mean to be counter to my good friend, the human highlight reel, Dominique Wilkins, but this is why we always have to look back. Because in asking ourselves this question, how far have we come, we look around in our communities and we see that kids are literally still punished because of the zip code that they grow up in. They go to school where their heating and air don't work, where their infrastructure is falling apart, where teachers have to push around carts because there's not enough space, where they're overworked and underpaid. Ask yourself again the question, how far have we come? I don't know about anybody in this room, but I go to a black church. And every Sunday, we have those ladies who wear those big hats. And they sit on the front 2 rows, and they cook food after service, but then Sunday, they probably running around Grady or Emory going to feed and look at the sick and shut in. Y'all know the ladies I'm talking about? But what we don't think about is that from Monday to Saturday, they have to make decisions about whether or not they are going to pay their utility bills or get their prescription drugs. So again, ask yourself the very simple question, how far have we come? All around us, the grasp of poverty has placed its grip on both our newborn and elderly alike. And escaping the trap of impoverishment has become synonymous with the proverbial dog that chases his tail. So again, ask yourself the very simple question, how far have we come? And Zinga, I will tell you that in my 32 years of great wisdom, I have come to the resolve that the answer to the question, how far have we come, is that we've made progress, but nevertheless still have yet a ways to go. So now as we're taking this journey to bring our country together, as we're taking this journey of excellence, as we're taking this journey because life is not a singular step, we must pivot and ask ourselves the next question, which is, where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., in one of the best pieces of writing he ever had, and know that I Have a Dream speech is not number one. Number one is the letter from the Birmingham jail. Certain things are not debatable. And number 2, I believe, is this book entitled Where Do We Go From Here? But he gives us 2 choices: chaos or community. This is why this event is so exciting to me. This is why this event is something that I marked down on my calendar and circled, not just because I got a chance to be a part of the Hawks organization for just a day. I'm trying to work on my 10-day contract here. But because we have these choices of chaos or community. Look around you. We have Kim Jong-un, who's testing ballistic missiles that can reach Japan but may be able to reach the upper 48. Think about that. Think about the impact that Russia has in our global economy. Think about the war on terror that we're fighting every single day. and the men and women in our military who are putting their lives on the line. Think about the fact that just yesterday there was a sitting United States congressman. There was a sitting United States congressman. Let me repeat this. There is a sitting United States congressman from the state of Iowa that believes we have no place taking care of somebody else's babies. He was talking about black and brown babies, y'all. I don't know if y'all understand the spin. But for me, I can't help but to believe that we're on the brink of chaos. But the challenge for all of us is to build community. Let me tell you a story. There was a young man who was born at 633 Frederick Street in Denmark, South Carolina. He went to Howard University. I guess people got to go to school somewhere. And after when he got to Howard University, he befriended a man named Stokely Carmichael. And there's a little bit of irony in that Stokely actually graduated from Howard, but he convinced this young man from Denmark to drop out of school. And he did. He dropped out of school and he became a part of the civil rights movement or freedom struggle. He became a member of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. He went to Miami University of Ohio because that is where they were training and doing their training seminars for Freedom Summer. This was his first indoctrination into the civil rights movement until he got a phone call that he had to go to Philadelphia, Mississippi. Now, has anybody in this room been to Philadelphia, Mississippi? Raise your hand. I need to see this. 10. Philadelphia, Mississippi is the size of this depot. It's not much bigger. But this young man from Denmark, it was his first indoctrination. It was his first task in the civil rights movement because he was going to look for the bodies of 3 of his fellow slain civil rights workers, Goodman, Schreiner, and Cheney. And during the day, they would hide in barns and sheds, and at night, he would go out and look in ditches and trenches, and he couldn't wear belt buckles or boots or anything shiny because they were afraid of being caught. Ironically enough, they found the bodies of these 3 civil rights workers behind the home of one of the local sheriff's deputies and ministers in the big city of Philadelphia. His name was Edgar A. Killen. And that was this young man from Denmark following the advice of his good friend and brother Stokely Carmichael and becoming National Field Director of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. That was his first indoctrination into the movement, into the struggle. And then he came back home to South Carolina and became involved in the most deadly civil rights demonstration this country has ever seen. The most deadly civil rights demonstration this country has ever seen. You see, on the night of February 6th, 1968, the students at South Carolina State College, as it was known at the time, decided they were going to protest the All-Star Bowling Alley. The history books call it Jim Crow's final hiding place, the last vestige of discrimination. And so they went down to the bowling alley, and the bowling alley, it sits in a right angle. It's on Russell Street, right in downtown Orangeburg. And the students, they began to clap and chant and sing protest hymns as they were tucked into this right angle. And city police came, and the city police and state troopers came, and they began to surround many of the students. And as the students got louder, the city police and state troopers began to press up against the students, and the students began to press up against the glass, and then the glass broke. And when the glass broke, all hell broke loose. The police began to beat many of the students, but they beat them not with normal police batons, but they beat them with batons that were about this long, and at the end, they had these leather rawhide whips. A young man named James Strobin tells a story of seeing one student. She was a freshman at the time. She was being held by 2 state troopers while another one beat her. The students that night, they had to go back to their campus and they had to heal not only their physical wounds, but their emotional wounds and mental wounds as well. And then came February 7th. February 7th was a day where older people say the tension was so thick that you could cut it with a knife. But nothing happened. But then came that fateful day of February 8th, 1968, when the students at South Carolina State decided they were going to protest the All-Star Bowling Alley again, but this time when the state troopers came, the students got the right idea, and they went back to their campus, and They built this huge bonfire. And you all are all in the South. You know how it feels in February of the winter months, how a bonfire can just ever so gently warm up your bones because it's not too cold, but it's cool. You can imagine how the embers illuminate the darkness. These students, they felt safe in their numbers. They felt safe in their communion because they had gathered together, much as we've gathered here today, for a singular cause and a common good. But they did not foresee what would happen next. They didn't foresee that South Carolina state troopers would line up along the embankment in front of their beloved campus. They did not foresee that those state troopers would close ranks like they did. They did not foresee that those state troopers would have shotguns that were loaded with deadly double-dot buckshot, so the same bullets we use to hunt deer. And they did not foresee that those shotguns would be turned on them with deadly intent. And for 8 seconds, 1001, 1002, 1003, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, shots were fired into the group of students. It killed 3, Henry Smith, Samuel Hammond, and Delano Middleton. It wounded another 29. A young man from Denmark was hit in the shoulder that night, and he was taken to the infirmary. When he got to the infirmary, they were told there was nothing they could do for him on campus. He had to go to the hospital, and when he got to the hospital, ironically enough, he was pointed out by the only black sheriff's deputy in Orangeburg County at the time, and he was arrested. He was arrested, and he was charged with 5 felony counts because everybody knew he was a member of SNCC. And in between the time of the Orangeburg Massacre, as the history books call it, February 8th, 1968, and the time of his actual trial, it's amazing how history repeats itself. But all 9 officers who fired shots into the group of students, killing 3, wounding 29, were tried. And all 9 officers were found not guilty. This young man from Denmark actually went to trial. The lead investigator from the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division said that he could not find the evidence, but he did recall this young man from Denmark standing on top of a fire truck, lighting a Bic and saying, "Burn, baby, burn." And so the indictment was backdated from February 8th to February 6th. And he was charged with rioting. He was tried for rioting and convicted of rioting by an all-white jury. And he became the first and only one-man riot in the history of this country. I like to say on that night, injustice left mothers without their sons. It left the pages of my state's history stained red with blood. This young man from Denmark, instead of just being housed in normal circulation because he was deemed to be an outside agitator, they actually made him spend most of his hard labor time on death row. But when you look at him today and you see that, and you ask him what's the greatest sacrifice he had to make, and you see that his eyes don't pop like they used to from being a part of that Emmett Till generation that has shed so many tears, or you see that his shoulders don't stand as upright as they once did from carrying the burdens of a generation, and you ask him what is the greatest sacrifice he had to make, he'll tell you that the greatest sacrifice he had to make was not being in jail or losing his freedom per se, but it was actually being in jail for the birth of his oldest daughter, or my big sister. Because this young man from Denmark who grew up into a civil rights hero is my father, Dr. Cleveland Sellers. And you see the lessons that I learned from people like Emmett Till, and the lessons that you learn from Medgar Evers, and the lessons that you learn from people like Henry Smith and Samuel Hammond and Delano Middleton and Jimmy Lee Jackson and even George Elmore and the 4 little girls and Martin, Malcolm, and Rosa, and all of those heroes and sheroes, Majeska Simpkins and Septima Clark, is that the answer to the question, where do we go from here, lies fundamentally in the ability for us to do 2 things. It doesn't matter if you're the owner of the Hawks or you're the janitor in the arena. It doesn't matter if you're the owner of the Hawks or you're the janitor in the arena, you have to learn how to do 2 things. The first is you have to believe that you can dream with your eyes open. That you can dream with your eyes open, that you can literally impact your world outside of the doors in which you reside, that you can go out and change the world that you can live in, that You can tell young people if they want to be a scientist, then they can be George Washington Carver. Or if they want to be a politician, then they can be Nelson Mandela. Or if they want to be a doctor, they can be Ben Carson, not crazy political Ben Carson, but gifted hands Ben Carson. I need to come up with another doctor. Let's rewind. If they want to be a doctor, be David Satcher. So that is the concept of dreaming with your eyes open. And then the other thing is even more difficult. It's damn hard to do. The answer to the question, where do we go from here? This is something that's going to test your strength. When you go back to New York and you have to look at law enforcement, or you're just going through whatever, we all have those moments. Because you have to begin to love your neighbors even when they don't love you. That is the most difficult thing that we have to do. I'm not saying turn the other cheek. I'm not saying just get slapped down and don't say anything, but I am saying that even when people hate you because of the color of the skin or the who you love or what you wear on your head or how you pray or who you pray to or what part of Atlanta you are from, you have to begin to love your neighbors even when they don't love you. Now, that is very difficult for me in my daily job. I work for CNN, and they put me on TV sometimes with some interesting personalities, to say the least. But as I think about this question, which is where do we go from here, I can't help but to believe that on this journey to excellence, that if I dream with my eyes open, that if I love my neighbors even when they don't love me, there's nothing that I cannot achieve. People look at me sometimes and they drive me crazy by thinking that for some reason I'm atypical. That for some reason I'm a young black man who has been able to do some things in his life and think that for some reason I'm different than average, and I'm not. My job in this world is to reach back and lift up all of those who have not had those opportunities. My job is to make sure that everyone who wasn't blessed like I am has that opportunity to succeed. So as we focus on building community in this room, let's not forget about those whose voices have not been heard, who have been screaming for the longest. And let's not forget those voices and those shoulders upon which we stand. I don't know much, but I do know that it's not necessarily about who we were. It's not necessarily about who we are today. It's about who we can be. So as we take this journey to bringing this country together, I guess I'll just leave you with this. In all things that you do, whether or not you're the CEO of the Hawks, the vice president of diversity, starting shooting guard, whether or not you're a season ticket holder, when you leave this room, in all things that you do, I want you to do them so well that no man living, no man dead, and no man yet to be born can do them better. That's the definition of excellence. That's the end goal for all of us if we're ever going to get this thing on the right track. So with that, I say thank you and end where I began.